Alright, so this is the update on the bearing cleaning project. We left off with this guy here in one piece, but it looked like this. And the idea was the bearings would sit on the tabs and that you'd spin it around the central axis by shooting a jet of water at the bearings. It would spin the bearings, which would agitate the grease, allow the water to jet it out of the bearing, and it would spin and advance to the next bearings, and everything would be spinning. The problem was that only the assembly was spinning and the individual bearings were not. So the solution I came up with was to make a little ring that would sit on there like that, and as that would spin, it would kind of be like a planetary gear and make the bearings spin. So this was actually size for that one. And when I made this, the problem I encountered was that even though this is pretty flat, it's not completely flat. So that it was actually only contacting some of the bearings, and some of them would spin and some would not. So I moved on to this design with this ring, and let me put that together for you real fast. So this was designed so that well, these bearings, that was the wrong one. It was designed so the bearings would be these holes would be undersized, so the bearings would go on really easily like that. And I'll just put a couple on, we don't need all of them. And I'll put the bearing in the center like that. It was designed so that as you tighten this down, these arms can flex down so that it's able to put pressure evenly on all the bearings. And you can see that worked. Well, there, I can spin all the bearings by spinning the ring. But the problem that this one had was that there was so much drag going on that when I shot the water jet, nothing would spin at all. And I thought that was just because because these were loose, I thought that this was pushing these up and making them bind in a weird way. Anyway, so I redesigned the whole thing with this one. So these are longer, so they could flex more. These were better fitting, still loose, but better fitting, so that things couldn't twist on them. And all that. And basically what happened with this one was similar. So it can spin, and there was better suspension so that it wasn't binding on any one bearing, and this is a 45-degree angle that fits with the bevel on the top of the bearing. So anyway, it was all really nice, well done, so that it couldn't be binding or doing anything weird anywhere. And this one also didn't spin. And it turned out that the resistance of all 8 bearings at once was so much that it just kind of bound the whole system up. So let me actually load this up and see if I can demonstrate how much resistance it has when you do that. Okay, so here it is, all assembled, and you can see it's spinning all the bearings, and it's working nicely, but there's no grease in it, so they're just dry, and it's got quite a bit of drag, and it had quite a bit more with that thick grease in it. So this concept of having the ring spinning all the bearings just wasn't going to work because the jet of water just didn't have enough torque to force it to spin. So then what I did is I just took a single bearing and I used the jet of water like I've used many times just to clean a single bearing, and I tried to spray just one bearing, which is something I should have done earlier. But because this grease I had in here, this blue grease, it wasn't able to spin even a single bearing with all of its torque on one bearing. This grease I had, it must be 40 years old or older. It talks, anyway, I bet it was my grandpa's. And it's really, really good grease as far as how waterproof it is. But modern greases are a lot better in that they shear thin, so that they're tacky like a real viscous fluid, but then when they shear and when they're rolling, they act like a low viscous fluid, like water. So they call it shear thinning. This old grease didn't shear thin very well, and the coldness of the water made it harden a little bit. So it just couldn't clean out, or it just couldn't spin the bearings with that blue grease in it. And I thought that blue grease would just make it really good for testing benchmark. Like, if it can clean up this blue grease, it can clean out anything. Turns out almost nothing can clean out this blue grease. I tried acetone. Acetone couldn't clean that stuff out. I tried scrubbing a little bit with some toothbrushes. That was just nasty and gross. So I decided that blue grease was just completely unrealistic for testing. So I was going to go back and use this grease, which is the Schaefer's 274, I think it was, that I've just rebottled and relabeled. And that will be, I think, a much more realistic test. So, all these bearings are clean. These are all my bearings that had that blue grease in it, and they don't anymore. And how I cleaned them out was actually with my old washing machine bag, which I made a video of earlier. This, I think, is the absolute best way to clean bearings. I mean, I'm making this bearing cleaning project because it's kind of fun and I want to make it, but I don't think it'll clean bearings better than this thing. So I've got a whole video on this, but basically it's a nylon bag full of toothbrush heads. You stick the heads in the bag. I had all these bearings in the bag that I cleaned all at the same time. You throw them in there, you put some washing machine detergent in there, and you throw it in with a load of something that isn't going to get stained by grease. So I washed a bunch of tent bags and outdoor stuff that needed to be cleaned after a muddy, rainy campout. And it cleaned off this rusty, grody grease. And you can see some of these bearings are still a little blue, but I'm really surprised how, oh, I'm not just surprised, I'm impressed by how well that worked. So you can see this has got the nylon retainer, which blocks brushes and stuff from being able to access this side of it. So it can only clean from basically from this side, and that's really clean. Some of these bearings have shields on one side still, like this one, and you can see that one's really clean. So yeah, so if you want to clean bearings, this washing machine bag is a really good method of doing it. So anyway, where I am now that I've determined that the blue grease was the problem, and I'm going to be using my normal grease instead, is I've redesigned the bearing cleaner again, and this is what I've come up with. First of all, I've changed the style of the bearing holders. They are segmented posts that are oversized, so they hold the bearings securely, but because they can flex a little bit, the bearings are still easy to take on and off. In order to make sure that the outside bearings spin and just this whole assembly doesn't spin, what I've done is I've put 2 bearing seats on the assembly. Or actually, I'm calling it the rack, the bearing rack now. And the idea with that is you can tighten up the 2 bearings, and there's no spacer between the 2, and that will increase drag in the center. You can hear there's no grease in there, and that'll increase drag in the center so that it's able to spin the outside bearings. More of the energy is able to go to spinning the outside bearings. And so that's where I'm at now. So I'm going to put this normal grease, or more normal grease, and I'll be using with that. And with this thing, the story about how this exploded is I had my pressure washer out. So I decided that if my little nozzle wasn't working, I'd try it with the pressure washer to see if that would work. And it exploded. It had so much pressure and got this thing spinning so fast, it exploded the bearing rack. I got thwacked in the chest with some bearings, going who knows how fast. Flung them across the yard. I'm missing 3 bearings from that. But it didn't do any better at getting rid of that grease than the regular hose nozzle. And it didn't do any better at spinning the outside bearings. So that blue grease was just a nightmare, and I spent all this time trying to work around what I thought was a problem with the design, but it was a problem with the grease I was using. So there we go. Hopefully we're one step closer with this latest design to giving us a functional bearing cleaner. Longboard technology, over and out.